episode each week that we really did not plan on doing, but we're going through with it anyway. So, yeah, thank you once again for being here.
Oh, absolutely glad to be here.
But we're going through with it anyway. So very glad to thank you once again for being here. I think talking about the coronavirus and the social science of it, that's not quite an easy thing to do because the coronavirus is so multifaceted and it impacts different people in different parts of the world in different ways. But from what I've seen here in the United States, a lot of people really are, I don't want to say losing their minds, but they are definitely, well, they're taking it seriously, which is good in certain respects. But at the same time, there is sort of like an apocalyptic thing going on, I think, the mindset that a lot of folks have, most unfortunately. And it definitely is something else. But if you want to share your opening thoughts on this, please go ahead and do so.
Well, I start from a position of ignorance that I don't know that much about coronavirus. So what I avoided doing early on in this story is that I avoided taking any strong positions so that I didn't get locked into a particular position, because then you get very tempted to defend it. So challenges like this are kind of exciting for men who have opinions about societal issues, because we get to demonstrate two of our premier values. And one is we get to, number one, demonstrate our moral values. So we get to share with the world what we think is important. And then we also get to combine that with what we think is a reliable source of information. So those are like two key things to know about someone who gives opinions about world issues, societal issues, is what do they stand for? What do they believe in? What are their hierarchy of values? And then where do they see reliable information? How are they able to distinguish between the dross and the gold? And so in issues like this, I turn to people like Steve Saylor, and I turn to people like Gregory Cochrane, and then I kind of work out from there. So those are two thinkers about these kind of issues who I take seriously. And so I like to read what they have to say, and then I read the links that they recommend, and then I go from there. So those are my sources of information. And then as for my values, I don't know if they're any different than anyone else's with regard to pandemics. I would rather see the very minimum of pain and suffering.
As would I, and I hope everyone else. I myself am not trained in dealing with anything medically. I have no training of any kind. Though I'm very interested in seeing how, I guess, the social or sociological reactions to this virus go. That to me is really fascinating matter. And I guess when people are faced with any sort of perilous situation, they are forced to create a hierarchy, even though they might claim that they don't like hierarchies in life. But they're forced to create a hierarchy. They're forced to prioritize what's most important to them, who is most important to them. And generally speaking, some people might even feel compelled to reevaluate their worldview in one way or another as a result of dealing with something like a pandemic. So I think that all of the things which this coronavirus is bringing to humanity now, specifically in the developed world, because in the undeveloped world, people have to deal with the hierarchy every day, whether they like it or not, just because it's a fact of life, and they don't have the material resources of sort of obfuscating that hierarchy. They just have to, they live hand to mouth, so they have to prioritize, and that's the end of the story. But it is interesting to see how this coronavirus in the developed world is making people closer to their primal instincts as human beings. And that, among many other things, is something I find to be quite interesting.
Yeah, because you would think that a pandemic such as this, it tends to bring out people's xenophobia, their bigotry, their racism, their fear of strangers, their fear of contagion, their fear of dirtiness and messiness, and fear of everything that's strange and different. So you would think that it would be a red pilling experience, that people would see that maybe there are some useful useful reasons for inherent human tendencies towards xenophobia, inherent human tendencies towards fear of people who are different, inherent human tendencies towards fear of contagion, fear of messiness. And another thing that strikes me is that a couple of months ago, I listened to an audiobook from skeptic Michael Shermer on conspiracy theories. He made the point in the book that the world is a much more dangerous place than what we think about as we walk around in the world, that most of us would have excessive amounts of anxiety, worry, and fear if we accurately kept in mind the dangers of reality. And so this pandemic, this coronavirus problem, is reminding us that reality is a whole different thing than what we conceive of. We walk around with our preconceptions. We walk around with all these barriers between us and reality. We have our beliefs. We have our language. We have our filters with how we encounter reality. And then reality just budges in on our preconceptions. It destroys sometimes our filters, and the dangerousness of life, the nearness of death, the dangers around us, the hidden dangers, the obvious dangers, the economic dislocation, the social dislocation. It will break through, bust, smash, eliminate the filters with which we go through life. And so when we are then denuded of our habitual defenses of how we interpret reality, it can be an incredibly humbling experience. And then wise people will have to adjust the filters. They will have to take into account this new information and realize once again how close death is to all of us, to some of us more than others, and bring into more at the forefront of our minds something that most of us most of the time want to push away, and that is how inherently dangerous life is, far more dangerous than what we habitually are conscious of as we go through life.
Mm-hmm. Everything you just said, I can hardly disagree with it. And what I find especially interesting are people who tend to believe that there is some sort of material equality that is at least possible, that they strive for, but then they are dealing with something like the coronavirus. And like I said, they have to prioritize, and this factors into a lot of the stuff you just mentioned as well. And so this really is a sort of thing that the virus, it really is a sort of thing that makes people deal with the world around them in an unfiltered fashion. And I mean, you were just speaking about that quite a bit, and it's quite it's fascinating. I think I might be using that word a bit too much, but it's the best way I could really describe my perspective on this. It's interesting to see people having their worldview challenged, not just by an opposing theory, but by actual real-time events, which force you to reevaluate how you act, not because you want to, but simply because you want to survive. And survival, I mean, is a process of adaptation. If nothing else, you have to adapt or nature fades you out. So this coronavirus is most certainly a springboard for this adaptation, unlike anything I've seen before in my life. Some people compare it to 9/11. But I think 9/11 was very different. And there are certainly quite a few parallels. But 9/11, I think, was very different. This Corona thing is, I think it strikes more toward an existential dread. 9/11 was something terrible that people wanted revenge for. But the coronavirus, you can't get revenge against a virus. This just makes us confront our status as mere mortals. I think that drives a lot of people crazy, which might lead them to over prepare for it, to go nuts. I mean, back during the Black Plague, there were people drove themselves into a hysteria because they were scared of getting the plague. The irony is that they would often wind up engaging in communal prayer or going out singing and dancing because they just lost their minds. And because they then were surrounded by other people, they would get the plague when they otherwise would not have been beleaguered by it. So it's this whole thing really is something else, to say the absolute least.
Yeah, I just read an interesting New York Times article, and the New York Times is my favorite source of news. So I read more articles from the New York Times than any other publication, and by quite a a high degree compared to the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and even the Wall Street Journal. And the New York Times had a thoughtful essay this week saying that most people don't react to crises like the coronavirus with panic. Most people react with complacency. That there tends to be 3, 4, 5 times as much complacency in general with people than panic. So this article said that in these type of situations that maybe 10% up to 30% of the population overreact, and then about 70% to 90% of the population tend to underreact to these kind of crises. So you hear a lot of discussion in the news media about the dangers of panic and the dangers of overreaction. But I think it's accurate to say that it is more of a general human tendency to react to an unseen danger like this more with complacency than with overreaction. So the people who went out and bought, emptied the grocery store shelves and bought all the toilet paper, they were grossly overreacting in general. But I would suspect that most people are going to underreact, and there will be a fatigue that sets in very quickly, because in New York and California, we're basically told to shelter in place until we hear otherwise, unless you work in an essential industry. But that is not sustainable long term, and so people may take very strict measures to try to ward off infection. But people get tired. They can't maintain these stern measures for long. People get tired. They let down their guard. They relax. They stop being as careful. People want to touch each other. People want to mix with each other. So very soon, fatigue is going to set in, and people are going to start letting down their guard with regard to this kind of problem.
It's interesting talking about the complacent versus the overreactors. I guess I would be definitely falling into the more complacent category, even though I don't minimize this thing. But when it comes to the overreactors, I guess it is the old saying that the extreme makes an impression. So you see more of these people and they make more of an impression on you, even though relative to the overall population, they probably don't constitute a majority. That is quite something else. But it creates the idea that everyone is overreacting, even though that's not the case. That really is something else. It's something not brought up enough. Thank you for doing so. It would have flown over my head otherwise. But talking about, I guess, the virus and sheltering in place, definitely that builds cabin fever. I don't like, I don't like not being able to go out and do things, so on and so forth. I'm sure most other people are the same way. And cabin fever is not it's not a fun thing, to say the absolute least. And after a while, people will just start going outside more, as you were mentioning, and doing X, Y, and Z. Although if there is a law in place which forces a sort of self-quarantine, then they could wind up getting arrested for this. So how the criminal justice system will ultimately wind up responding to this phenomenon, to me, is very interesting. And we'll see what happens. But the next few weeks are going to tell us not only about human nature, but about how the government reacts to something which brings out, shall we say, facets of the human condition, which are typically not put out on display.
Yeah, and one definition of maturity that I heard decades ago, but has stuck with me ever since, is your ability to handle challenges, handle disturbances to your expectations without hurting yourself or other people. So some people, if just a little thing goes wrong, they immediately start binge drinking, or they'll do drugs, or they'll go, I'm so stressed, I need to Netflix out, or I need to, flutter a few bets on the horses. So other people can handle a tremendous amount of adversity without trying to hurt themselves or others. So this is adversity, and how well people react to it will be a measure of their maturity. So if it turns out that the wisest thing one can do is to maintain social distancing, then people with more maturity will maintain their social distancing, and those with less maturity who are not able to handle this kind of adversity, they will start being reckless early on. And then I think I'm just wondering out loud, does having a relationship with God make this kind of thing easier? Is life perhaps a little less lonely for people who have a relationship with God? And are people who are more psychologically sturdy, just better at dealing with adversities? So for me, it's really important to live a highly disciplined life. I lead a highly regulated, highly routinized life. So now, even before as well as with my regular schedule, I get up at 5:30 a.m. I take a cold shower. I get on a 12-step phone meeting. I take my supplements. I do my exercises. I talk to my sponsees. I talk to other people in the program. And only after I've been up and about for approximately 3 hours do I finally look at the news and eat my breakfast, and then if I can just pile on positive action after positive action, that starts a positive spiral in my life. So even with the shutdown, the coronavirus, if I'm doing these things right from 5:30 a.m. to 6 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. to 7 a.m., I'm meeting my responsibilities, I'm meeting my commitments to myself, to other people. If I'm doing the right things to get myself in the right headspace, and then I'm taking care of work, I'm taking care of my earning, and then with my spare time, I like to live stream or read books. So if I do that, as opposed to, say, Netflixing out at 11 a.m., I feel good about myself. So I try to spend the first 12 hours of my day in productive ways. And then after I've been going for 12 hours, then I'm off the hook. Then I can watch Netflix, then I can watch a movie. But if I'm using my time productively, particularly in those first 12 hours of the day, then I feel good about myself. If I've maintained my commitments, if my commitments, say, have turned to over the phone or via the Zoom app, for example, rather than in person, if I've met my commitments, then I also feel good about myself. So I have noticed in my life that good things tend to spiral, that when you do one good thing, other good things tend to follow in its wake, and also that bad news tends to spiral. Bad things tend to happen one after another. So, for example, if my girlfriend breaks up with me, usually something else goes wrong shortly thereafter, and these bad results start to spiral. On the other hand, if I'm exercising self-discipline, if I'm starting the day with the most difficult part of my day, a cold shower, and boom, I get that done. And then boom, I get onto my 12-step phone meeting, which has a very sobering effect on me. And then boom, I do the exercises that I need to do to locate and let go of unnecessary tension and to strengthen muscles which otherwise would get weak and cause me, say, back pain. If I keep doing the right things, then good things spiral for me one on top of another. So, for example, I had more than 4 months of my expenses saved up prior to this pandemic, because I've been careful with my finances. I've made a strong commitment to saving money. And so I also have multiple streams of income that I can do from home. And so I've managed, by making good decisions, to place myself in a good place to deal with adversity like this.
That is fascinating stuff, Luke. There goes that word again, fascinating, but it is. I'm much more, I guess you could say, unregulated, even though I have stuff to do but I don't function as well within like a rigid environment. I'm more, I guess, nonconformist in a whole host of ways. But what you just mentioned makes total sense about how to live a life that tends to have amplified returns, whether they're positive or negative. You tend to know what you're getting. So that really is amazing. It's also very smart that you had money saved up ahead of this coronavirus problem. Certainly something that I think more people wish they had done. But anyway, it's really, that was really great to listen to your perspective there. It's quite something else. I was going to mention that, I guess, you get up like at 5:30 in the morning, but you have nothing pressing early in the morning. Do you ever feel that perhaps maybe I could have slept in and it would have made any difference overall to my day? Or does that sort of go against the more regulated perspective on general principle?
Oh, okay. So I'm not. So one difference since I've been homebound due to California's restrictions is that I no longer set my alarm. So normally I have my alarm set for 5:32 a.m. and I no longer set my alarm. Now, this morning I or the other morning, I think I slept in until 5:50 a.m. But otherwise, I'm waking up by 5:30 a.m. on my own. But if for some reason I slept through to 6:30 a.m., I would not berate myself. On Saturdays and Sundays, I don't set my alarm either. And there have been Saturdays where I've slept in until about 7 a.m. But normally I naturally awake at 6 a.m. But yeah, I have made that one shift. I no longer set an alarm. So if I wake up 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes later, I don't berate myself. Everything's a-okay. But what I don't do is radically shift my sleep schedule. So I'm able to still stay in a productive cycle. I saw Mike Cernovich doing a stream earlier about people. A lot of people apparently are gaining weight during this crisis because one of the most common ways that people deal with stress, including myself, is overeating. Because when you overeat, you don't just get the pleasure of eating, which can distract you from your problems, but also if you eat a lot, then all the blood rushes to your stomach, and so it takes away anxiety. A full stomach, people don't tend to be anxious on a full stomach. You just tend to be lethargic and deadened. So that's an example of if instead you have a purpose and a reason for your life, then you have less reason perhaps to be anxious and to need to deaden your emotions because you feel so much anxiety and fear. So one thing I notice when I watch TV, watch movies, and read novels is that more than 95% of the time, I notice that the protagonists in these dramas who get into trouble, they never have anything higher to live for than the satisfaction of their own inclinations. So for many people, it'll be the inclination for love. For others, it will be the inclination for sex. For others, it will be the inclination for excitement. For others, it will be the inclination to feel important. For other people, it will be the inclination to get attention. But anyway, most people seem to be largely driven by their instincts, and in dramas they rarely seem to have anything that they would live for that's higher than the satisfaction of their inclinations. And if you simply have something transcendent in your life that you put ahead of satisfying your inclinations, you can stay out of trouble much easier. So for example, let me be concrete. I got into a lot of trouble in the workplace over the years because I would speak inappropriately. That highly sexualized talk would just come into almost every conversation in completely inappropriate ways, and I was just getting into arguments with people. I was trying to bang women that I was working with. I was pursuing like inappropriate relationships. I was just all over the place and just being a pest, attention seeking, all sorts of problems in the workplace. And then once I got into my various 12-step programs that deal with emotional addiction, I was able to put something higher than the satisfaction of my desire for attention. And as someone with a lot of narcissistic tendencies, my desire for attention is my own sick way of replacing the ability to love. And so by putting something above my desire for attention, suddenly all the problems that I've always gotten into in the workplace have just completely disappeared. And it's not because I'm holding myself back on a leash saying, oh, Luke, don't say anything inappropriate to that cute, new girl who's working in the next office. It's not because I'm holding myself back on a leash, don't say something racist to the affirmative action employee up the hallway. It's not because I'm, holding myself down, don't relay that terribly inappropriate joke that you heard last night. I don't have to do any of that as long as I have something higher to live for than the satisfaction of my own inclinations. And so I think for people in particular who don't have anything higher to live for than the satisfaction of their inclinations, they will get into trouble when they encounter adversity, such as this pandemic, because they will just naturally follow the quick fixes, say, to deal with their anxiety. They'll overeat, or they'll overdrink, or they'll overwatch Netflix or movies or TV. As Adam Carolla said on Tucker Carlson's show last night, you can use this crisis to write a novel, or you can use this crisis to get a venereal disease.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here, but I do agree that if you live for something beyond your own inclinations, you will have more purpose definitely keep you out of trouble. I myself am a person that definitely lives for my inclinations, but I keep out of trouble by thinking about the consequences of actions and the probability of the consequences, facing me in some adverse fashion. And so that's good enough for me, but for most people who live for their own inclinations, it definitely I don't think is. It probably helped them when I was a boy. My father took me to work with him, and he was the warden of the state juvenile jail, one county north of here. So, but definitely consequences of actions of consequences, and that always has kept me out of any real trouble, thankfully. But for a lot of people, it just doesn't. I think it's a matter of their personal psychology. Talking about a God and how that could help people weather something like the coronavirus. Definitely, I do agree with that. Even though I'm not a believer in the supernatural myself, I can certainly see how having a God, having a purpose and explanation would make the sufferings of life associated with a pandemic more, I don't want to say trivial, but it would certainly put it in a more relativistic perspective than, I'm living for myself and this stuff is facing me in some very not cool fashion, and therefore I'm going to flip out. So for those of us who don't have like that higher calling, it's very easy to flip out when something doesn't go your way because you're living for things that do go your way, and you have to really to take a step back and breathe, and you have to think about the consequences of any adverse actions you might make. And it's that obviously is not enough to chill a lot of people out, but hopefully, well, I don't know that it would ever really change, but as I say, hopefully it chills enough people out during the weeks ahead to not have a bunch of folks flipping out over nonsense. But unfortunately, this is what happens during a crisis here in Florida. We're used to hurricanes, and I have seen people in an environment after a hurricane hits, before and after, but even after it's worse, where they're losing because they're out of power. They don't get power back. They have no running water. Maybe they don't even have cellular phone service. And they are just, when the crisis, the hurricane is over and you're living in the aftermath, people immediately, their question is, when is this going to get better? Before the hurricane, their question is, will I survive? Will my house be okay? But there is a panic mentality that sets in with big negative events, whether it be a natural event like a hurricane or, well, a pandemic is a natural event, just one of a different kind. So it's, there's a lot to look at here, and having like a God or something to believe, to have faith in, can ease the process tremendously and regulate your behavior in a positive fashion. I'm the first to admit that, even though I'm not a believer myself.
Yeah, so most of us get regulated by other people. So this is the norm. We get regulated by interacting with others, by having other people in our lives who we love and they love us. But if you come from, say, a chaotic childhood like I did, where I grew up in foster homes and I was just rotated around all these different foster homes when I was a kid. So then when my family was reconstituted after my mother's death, I had one parent who was very ill, and she would just bounce me off the walls. And then I had another parent who was completely involved in his preaching. So as a child, I didn't have anyone really that I could turn to soothe my anxiety. So instead, I turned to delusions of grandeur. I would turn to my fantasies about what I would do if I ruled the world, if I was the Prime Minister of Australia, if I was a general in battle. So for many narcissistically inclined persons such as myself, because we did not learn, we weren't able to connect with other people to regulate our anxiety, we would turn to feeling special. That's how we would soothe ourselves. A normal person turns to his friends and family to soothe his anxieties, but the narcissistically inclined person who wasn't able to do that turns to that delusion of feeling special. So now we're doing this social distancing, so this regulation that we get from other people, which is so very, very important, is just not available for almost anyone to the extent it was prior to this pandemic. So it's a tremendous challenge. And I just want to give one example of how people can completely go off the rails if they don't get this kind of face-to-face regulation. I had a friend who's a successful academic, successful overall in his life, married, kids, good job, everything, appeared quite sterling in his life. and I introduced him to dissident right thought about 5-6 years ago, and he got into it. And we had a lot of good conversations, and I told him, hey, let's read Mein Kampf. And so we read Mein Kampf. We discussed it, and I mean, everything was fine. But then he went off on his own, and he started developing all these different internet personalities, and he started doing his own solo streams. And then he didn't have, when he was doing a solo stream, or when he was just trolling online with all these fake Twitter accounts and fake YouTube accounts, he lost that regulation that you get when you're interacting with someone. And so he's just started saying all this incredibly self-destructive stuff that would strike normies as just being Nazi-like. And I kept trying to reel him back in for years. I said, this is really self-destructive. I'm not making any moral argument against what you're saying. I am only arguing to you that this is self-destructive for you and for the people who care about you. And he could not hear me. He just could not hear me, and so he just completely went off the rails for years, because when he wasn't being regulated by interacting with someone else, when he was just solo trolling on YouTube chats or on his own solo streams or on his various Twitter personalities, he would just completely go off the rails. So people tend to be the most normal, the most healthy people are regulated through interactions with other people who they care about. And so now that that's being severely curtailed, what are people going to turn to regulate them? So for some people, it will be a relationship with God, a relationship with the transcendent. Other people have built up such a sturdy inner psychology that they can power through this kind of crisis and simply use this downtime to write a novel or to read books. But a substantial part of the population, I would say the overwhelming majority of the population, are going to lack the regulation that they used to have from their interactions with other people, and they are going to go a little bit crazy or moderately crazy or a lot crazy.
Mm-hmm. Definitely no. High stress situations produce craziness. I'm just thinking of your friend reading Mein Kampf. It's a book that's very widely available, obviously, but it's not a book that I think a lot of folks should read on their own, because they might go as crazy as Hitler ultimately did. But it definitely is something that, I'm not saying it shouldn't be available to read, but it has to be read, I think, with supervision of some sort of regulatory force, or else people can really jump off the end, most unfortunately. And it's interesting that the friend you were mentioning, you tried to make arguments to him in the best way, I think, to reel him back in, that this is self-destructive. If you talk to someone like that in a moralistic sense, like this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, not only they're not going to listen to you, but they'll probably get only more radical. But if you try to approach them in a way that is beneficial to their own interests, immediately, like them seeing that this is really going to make life difficult for me, this activism which I've embarked on, that can work. It doesn't necessarily work, but it's better than the moralizing, which just makes an already bad situation much worse, typically.
Yeah, and one of the great advantages that I've got from 12-step program is coming to terms with reality, meaning how little control we have over other people. So even at best, we are unlikely to be able to change anyone's behavior in the situation we discuss. Even at best, even if we frame things in the best way, we are still unlikely to be able to affect their behavior. And that's reality. And that's part of maturity and coming to terms with reality, is that how little we essentially have virtually no control over other people. We have the ability to at times influence some people some of the time, but we have no control over others. Another thing that I learned from the Al-Anon 12-step program is that when you make suggestions to people, only make them once. So this guy, I did make the suggestion probably a dozen times, so I didn't quite live up to that. But that idea of you only make a suggestion once to people has really helped me. So even if where I previously would have made a suggestion 20 times, now perhaps I only do it 3 times, that's still a significant improvement, because generally speaking, people will not abide by our unsolicited advice. Now, whether reading Mein Kampf is dangerous, I don't know. I think if you are a normal person, it's not going to be dangerous. If it's dangerous, it means that there's some part of you that's not whose needs are not getting met. So for my friend, he found in trolling and in, we'll just call it neo-Nazi trolling, he found in that an excitement and a sense of community and a sense of mission and a thrill that he was not getting in his normal life. So if your life is missing a sense of purpose, if your life lacks excitement, if your life lacks passion, if your life lacks overarching vision and say transcendence, then you're much more likely to get in trouble, not just with reading Mein Kampf, but following a football team. You might suddenly become a super sports fan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And if your life is not properly regulated, you could very well end up, wasting thousands of hours a year thinking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. A normal, healthy person, they're not going to go off the rails because they start watching a few Tampa Bay Buccaneers games. Other people, they have a few drinks of alcohol, and suddenly life, which was unbearable before alcohol, suddenly becomes bearable with alcohol, because with alcohol, it, say, unleashes their personality. They're able to more enjoy other people. They're able to sing and to dance and to be social and to be more outgoing, and it gives them a sense of confidence and energy. And so if alcohol or extreme politics or gambling or the pursuit of excitement suddenly meets a need in you, the problem isn't the alcohol, and the problem isn't the Mein Kampf book, and the problem isn't the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The problem is simply a symptom of what is an overall, I would call it a spiritual hole, or a hole in your soul, or simply a symptom of a life that doesn't work, because we are built to be excited. We are built to connect. We are built to live with vision and passion. And if we don't have that in our life, then we're very liable to find something come along that gives us at least a simulacra of these things, and then it can completely lead us off course.
That's brilliant. I mean, I have nothing to add. I agree entirely. Talking about, I guess, human relationships in the age of the coronavirus, dating, and you brought that up briefly before, dating is something that definitely is going to be, it's going to have a toll taken on it by this. But dating is very different today than it was even maybe 10, 15 years ago, because of the rise of online apps. And that makes the process of dating more atomized. Interestingly, one wouldn't think about dating and atomization, but that certainly has happened. But now with this virus, people won't even be able to connect from an online app, or if they are able to connect, there are going to be less people who will actually do it, even if they're interested in doing it. They'll just be too scared of what will happen should they get the virus or just be exposed to it. So, Luke, how do you think this will impact the romantic community, this coronavirus deal that everyone is besieged with?
Well, most people have, severely dysfunctional romantic relationships because they're unable to stand on their own 2 feet, and so they depend upon their partner to regulate them, to prop them up. It's called like borrowed functioning. I noticed at various times in my childhood, adolescence, into my 20s and 30s and 40s, when I would develop certain relationships, suddenly my life would transform. Like I'd make new friends or a new girlfriend, and she would bring me into all these new social interactions. I'd be at these really cool people's homes. I'd get invited to the cool parties. I might get a better job. I might have various forms of social advancement. And suddenly I was thrilled that, like now my life is taking off. But it was borrowed functioning. Someone came along who was more functional than me, who for whatever reason brought me into their life, and then I was brought along. So I remember in 9th grade, this kid who was pretty popular in my school, we became really good friends. And so I kind of borrowed his functioning, and my life dramatically improved. And then he died in an accident, and suddenly I went back to my baseline. So often in my life, I would depend upon being in a romantic relationship to soothe my anxiety and my fear and my sense of inadequacy. I remember in particular one time during the global financial crash that nothing in my life was going right, except I was in this wonderfully, erotically, romantically exciting relationship. So that was the only thing in my life that was going well. So every time I got together with my girlfriend, we had to have some kind of, intense, erotic experience because that was the only thing in my life that was working. Well, obviously I was putting, way too much weight on that aspect of the relationship, and the relationship couldn't handle it. You can't fail in every aspect of your life and then expect your romantic relationship to carry you through, because eventually your romantic relationship is going to crash under that pressure. So we often depend upon other people to regulate us, to prop us up, to tell us that we're awesome. For example, I know this one guy, he worked in some form of manual labor, but when he went home at night, he would write stories or screenplays, and then he'd read them to his wife or girlfriend, and she would cry and tell him how wonderful they were. But nobody else actually found his stories or his screenplays that wonderful. So he was being substantially propped up by his wife telling him how wonderful his stories were, but that was kind of out of touch with reality. And eventually reality has a way of kind of breaking through all our preconceptions. So those people who depend on others to help them function, those people who depend upon, say, really intense erotic experiences to make them forget all their fears or failures, those people who depend on people to prop them up in all sorts of different ways, in this pandemic, in this social isolation, they're going to have to stand on their own 2 feet, and they're going to have a really bad time. They're going to have a come to Jesus moment, to use a Goyish term, because all their defenses are going to be stripped away. They're going to find that they can't stand on their own 2 feet, and then they have the option of beginning again, but it'll kind of reveal to them who they really are. It reminds me, in something like 2011, I had to move out of an apartment building that I'd lived in for many years, and it was just a tremendously traumatic experience. Like, it really made me anxious, and what made me so anxious was that I had so little money to get a new apartment. So when I saw how limited my choices were, it was incredibly painful. And to think that I was in this situation at age 47, where I was thinking that I'd need to live in a bad part of town in a crappy apartment, this reality of having to move was traumatic, because it revealed to me that I couldn't live in my delusion that everything was fine anymore. Suddenly reality came crashing in. And so for people who depend upon others propping them up, for people who depend upon all sorts of delusions, this coronavirus pandemic may strip them of their delusions. They may suddenly find themselves without defenses, and they will have to confront themselves in a way that they may have never done before, and that is sure to be incredibly painful.
I was going to say that we have, I think, an unprecedented number of people with psychological disorders in our society, certainly more people than ever before taking psychotropic drugs to deal with these disorders. And at the same time, if the coronavirus produces an ever more fearful, alienated society, what will the ramifications of that be in a society that already had so many problems? And I guess looking at people having to confront themselves and take stock of their real-time relation to the world around them, I can see a lot of people completely going off the edge. So over the next several months, there might be an uptick in violent events, or people committing suicide or whatever, because of the impact that coronavirus has on their small sliver of society. It's really this is something that I've not heard anyone bring up. But it's really definitely something worth considering, because for so many people in society, they're living on the edge before this happened, and the virus might well push them over the edge, even if they don't get it, just because they would live more isolated from others. And it might also lead to an uptick in online radicalism as well, because of the atomization. People feel more stressed as a result of that, looking for the always perilous quick fix to their problems. But it's definitely no, it's not good. It's not good at all, and it's something I think that folks should be concerned over.
I used to really suck at math, so I sucked at math so bad that I retook geometry in high school, and I got a C each time I took geometry. That I sucked at math so bad that when I went to community college, I began with beginning algebra at community college, and I got a C. Then I went to intermediate algebra and I got a C. And then finally, after a year of community college, I started working construction, and it spoke to me. And so I then took most of us. I dropped all my classes but two, and I worked through a very miserable winter in construction. And then when I came back to school, I finally took it seriously. So I basically finally settled down and got straight A's, and I decided to become an economist, which would require an awful lot of mathematics. So to overcome my weaknesses, I would get up at 4 a.m. to study for my trigonometry class. And then after I took that, I'd get up at 4 a.m. to study for my calculus class. And the main problems that I had in trigonometry and calculus once I started to get serious was that I'd never really learned algebra. So I would think for most people, most of the pain that they will go through during this pandemic will reflect underlying pathologies, comorbidities, failures in their life, inability to stand on their own 2 feet that were completely present prior to this pandemic, but just this pandemic brings them into the fore so that they cannot run from them, that they cannot distract themselves, that they cannot live in a delusion anymore. So just as my algebra weaknesses were fully exposed when I decided to become an economist and studied calculus, and I would get all the calculus by dint of hard work, but because I hadn't done appropriate work in my algebra, I would continually run into these elementary algebra problems while trying to perform calculus. And I think a lot of people, adults in America, all sorts of ways that they have failed to grow up, failed to stand on their own 2 feet, failed to stay healthy. For example, having high blood sugar puts you at much higher risk for the coronavirus, but the inability to have reason, meaning, purpose, transcendence in your life, anything higher to live for than the satisfaction of your own inclinations. Or if you've, say, neglected your relationships with your family or friends, or maybe you don't even have any friends, suddenly the enforced isolation of this pandemic will force a lot of people to confront the emptiness of their lives, the failures in their lives, the lacking in their life, the vulnerability in their life, which prior to this pandemic, they've completely lived in a state of delusion most of the time. They were able to ward off reality with all sorts of their own, artificial conceptions about reality. But now reality has come crushing in, has overwhelmed people's defenses. And I think most of the pain that such people will feel will be the pain of having to confront reality. People who are otherwise fairly healthy, who have friendships and able to maintain them over the phone and via Skype and Zoom, and have reason and purpose. They have family. They're going to look after their kids. They're going to write a novel. They're going to read books that they've always wanted to read. That'll be fine. But those who are living in a world of delusion, they may be in for a very rude awakening.
I think something like this does show you how strong your social bond really are. And if you're living in a sort of propped up environment, as you had mentioned before, this will make that environment disappear pretty quickly. And a lot of people, I think, are going to be left at a big loss as a result of that. And this has so much to do not just with the coronavirus, but how society in America has been in a very healthy place when it comes to people's minds for quite a while. And it's something like this, I think, will certainly just make the situation worse, but it'll also tell us something about the nature of our society, and I guess just how much means of papering over the cracks within it really amount to when there's a big flush of water coming over to do away with the plastering.
Right, like an adult should have 6 months of living expenses saved up. And for most Americans, they don't even have $800 saved up. So there will be a very rude financial awakening. For people who don't have close ties to family and friends who can help you out in an emergency, this will be a rude awakening. I remember I wrote on the porn industry for many years, and various people I would be just acquainted with in that industry, when they needed a ride to the hospital, they would turn to me. And I was only an acquaintance. I just barely knew them, but they had no one in their life that they would turn to get a ride to the hospital. Like if when you go to see a doctor and you have to put down an emergency contact, if you don't have clarity about who you put down as your emergency contact, that reflects something that's really missing in your life. And America has been quite unhealthy. We've lived in this age of wokeness, which is just insane. Much of the Me Too movement is just insane. We've lived in a world of delusion. Maybe we're going to move into a new era now where we value competence over celebrity. Maybe we're going to move out of the world of celebrity. Now that our very lives are at stake, it would make sense that more of us will say value competence in science, in developing vaccines and medical advancements that will deal with pandemics like the coronavirus. So perhaps we will now rightly revere scientists and doctors and people making valuable, important contributions to society, just like the Sputnik crisis in the 1950s, when we were shocked that the Soviet Union put up a satellite, put up a space vehicle that would rotate around the world before we did. So that launched America's space program, launched a lot of people into careers in engineering. Well, maybe this virus will red pill people. Maybe we will change an era from wokeness, change an era from hysteria over women's hair and touching black people's hair, and all these women writing op-eds in the New York Times about their hair. Maybe the absurdity of parts of the Me Too movement we will leave behind because it's now just shown to be so trivial, and in exchange we will move into an era where we value greatness, where we value competence, where we value science, making genuine scientific discoveries rather than pushing hysteria, promoting some left-wing agenda. Maybe this whole crisis will lead people towards a more healthy fear of that which is foreign and strange and disgusting and different. Maybe we'll move into a more nationalist era where countries will see that they need to be able to manufacture their own pharmaceuticals, where they need to be able to manufacture and have on hand their own vital healthcare equipment. Maybe we'll move into an era where we no longer just offshore everything to China. Maybe we will realize that maybe this latest coronavirus is just one strange disease too many from China. We've had enough strange diseases coming out of China. Maybe people say enough.
Mhm. I would certainly hope so. I really hope that everything you just mentioned does true. I'm skeptical though about the future of society, but man, if what you mentioned does come to pass, it would be awesome. And I wish I give that vision of the future my best wishes. Before we move on to dealing with questions and comments from the live chat, reasonable and responsible ones, as always on this show, do you have any perspective on what the coronavirus will do to, I guess, human beings in relation to the economy? I mean, an economic crisis always tends to bring out the worst in people. But if you combine an economic crisis with fear of the virus, which we've been discussing quite a bit now, do you think that this will, how do you expect the human experiment to go in this very unfortunate state of affairs?
Well, for many months prior to this virus, I was running an ad on my YouTube channel for a website, preparewithluke.com, where people could buy 3 months of prepared food for like $90. And so perhaps people will take better care with their lives, so that I have food on hand for at least 4 months. I have not gone to a grocery store, and I haven't had anything delivered to me either since this pandemic hit, because I've taken care to have food and to have water, to have various vital things on hand, in addition to living expenses for at least 4 months, in addition to multiple sources of income that I can tap while working at home. So I think with healthy people, they'll become more responsible. They will devote more resources into savings. They will look into ways of developing multiple income streams that they can tap into while they work from home. They will waste money less on conspicuous consumption, or just on the satisfaction of their fleeting ephemeral instincts, and instead turn towards maintaining the most vital relationships, such as with family and friends, and preparing themselves for tougher times. So maybe this whole crisis will have a sobering effect on people. I think a lot of employers will see how it's even more efficient to have some people work from home, at least some of the time. I think there will be all sorts of ramifications through the economy. I think all sorts of businesses which have been on the brink for the last few years, that they will just go out of business. A lot of bookstores, a lot of restaurants, a lot of bars will just permanently go out of business. I think probably we'll have more wealth inequality because poor people, most Americans don't have $800 on hand to meet an emergency. So they're really going to be thrown by something like this. I think once people get the experience of having their groceries delivered, that many of them will continue to have their groceries delivered, that Amazon and Walmart will just get bigger and stronger, and neighboring stores, which were already in trouble, mom and pop stores, which were already in trouble, many of them will just go out of business.
It's a damn shame to see stores go out of business. Anything to me, that's really it's just awful. But I do think that you're right that a lot of places will go out of business, very sadly. But I don't see how that's avoidable, at least at this point in time. It's just it's just the nature of the beast, so to speak, when it comes to an economic downturn like this. Although I don't think this is a real recession per se because of some flaw in the economy. I think it's just because of the pandemic and how it impacts people. And that obviously means we'll be going out less, spending money, so on and so forth. So yeah, it's going to hit a lot of people very hard. It already is hitting a lot of people very hard. It's very, as I say, very unfortunate, but very terrible, horrific even. But I don't know. I hope maybe the economy will be retooled in some way as a result of this that allows more opportunity for people who are adversely affected by the downturn. But we shall see. We shall see. If there's anything else you'd like to say, Luke, before we get on to the
I'm thinking maybe
Andrew
Yang, maybe he was a prophet ahead of his time. Maybe once people get a taste of getting $1,000 every month from the government, maybe we will move to some kind of permanent, what was that, UBI? What does that stand for, Andrew Yang, where people, average Americans get
universal basic income.
Yeah, universal basic income. Maybe that will become part of the American system. With every crisis, including this one, I expect the government to get bigger, to get more intrusive. I know that if it would make me, say, 20% safer, that I'd be willing to put up with more government intrusion on, say, tracking cell phones, or a more authoritarian response to this crisis. Let's just say that China, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan dealt with this crisis far more effectively than, say, the United States, which is more individualistic and it's a federal system. So maybe authoritarian governments deal with crises like this more effectively. Maybe that will tilt the American political system into giving up more civil liberties in exchange for order, law and order, and safety. So if, let's say, United States and Western democracies are still struggling with the coronavirus a year from now, and let's just say that the Northeast Asian countries deal with it effectively within 3 months, then I think a lot of people in the West will look at Northeast Asia and say, I prefer that kind of system because at least they keep their citizens safe.
And let us now get on to the questions and comments. Half Galician says Luke Ford has risen to the occasion. Oswald Spangler says Fordona virus. Not quite sure what that means. 2 Cents says fascinating how the opinions vary on how serious of a threat the China illness is. Jay Bard says, outside of second best theory, is there a rule or a theory to identify the optimal human rights regime in an emergency scenario? I guess I'll take this first. And Luke, it would be a regime that would identify individual rights and liberties that would not quash them. But then the question becomes, how do you do that while protecting other people from those who might unintentionally do them harm, especially when it comes to an emergency scenario such as this with a communicable disease? It's very difficult, but I don't think there really is any optimal scenario that's workable in this age of ours. Luke, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm not someone who's in love with the Constitution. I don't believe in natural rights. I believe that instead we're primarily born into tribal or national identities, and that the rights that a nation or a tribe can extend to its members will depend on circumstance. So in certain circumstances, you can afford more rights than you can in other circumstances. So in dealing with something like the coronavirus, I don't think we can afford as many rights as we could prior to the coronavirus. So to me, rights are flexible. They are competing against each other, against goods such as security, order, and safety. So when you're fighting a war, you can afford to give your citizens far fewer rights than, say, when you're a well-protected island or a well-protected country with no imminent threats on the horizon. So I don't believe in natural rights that transcend national identity. I believe that primarily we're born into a tribe or a nation, and then the rights that the tribe or nation can afford to give us will constantly change depending on circumstance.
2 cents says Richard Spencer says Ramsey Paul's neural pathways are ossified. That's the quote, neural pathways are ossified more than fundamentalist preachers that. Richard Spencer, at this point, I don't even know if he's worth bringing up. YouTube won't zap us for talking about him because he's still on YouTube. But Spencer, I think, is borderline anti-social at this point in his perspective. I've always had profound disagreements with his politics and his worldview, but that's neither here nor there. But I think at this point, he's just he thinks Trump will lose. He has this issue with Ramsey Paul. It seems like he just lives to create conflict with people. And I think Spencer is perhaps an example of someone who is just, I wouldn't call him a troll, but he's someone who definitely brings with him, in my opinion, negative energy to anything that he is affiliated with. Even negative energy is still there. Luke, do you have any thing to say about this?
Yeah, I'm a great believer in trying to situate everybody in their genre. So, for example, if you're a sports fan, you would probably want someone with violent tendencies, working on your defense. That you don't want a defensive lineman who is just all sugar and spice. You want someone who's quite nasty, and you want someone who's going to be very fast and very disruptive and wants to destroy things. That's the kind of personality that you want for a member of your defense. On the other hand, for a member of your offensive line, you're going to value IQ and someone who wants to execute as part of a team to build something, to build yardage and points. So depending on the circumstance, you're going to want very different personalities. So if you situate Richard Spencer in the genre of shock jock, someone who loves to come up with constant contrarian takes, and who's, if you're able to appreciate his entertainment value or just his contrarian nature, then whatever Richard says or does is going to be fine, and it's not going to disturb you at all. On the other hand, if you're looking for Richard Spencer to be the type of person who checks the engines before the plane takes off, if you're looking to Richard Spencer to be a leader, if you want to attach your fortunes to Richard Spencer, you're probably going to get burned. So if you appreciate people in their genre, for example, you don't criticize a romantic comedy for not having a lot of war action scenes. And so a romantic comedy is one genre, an action movie is a different genre, a sci-fi movie is a different genre, horror film is a different genre. So too, if we simply situate people in their appropriate genre, then we're not going to get disappointed. So for example, the very meticulous accountant who's not very funny, it's silly to get mad at them because they're not funny. On the other hand, someone who's a hilarious stand-up comic but who would make a slipshod accountant because they're not careful, it'd be crazy to denigrate that stand-up comic for not having the right stuff for being a good accountant. So if you simply situate each person in his genre, you're going to be much less disappointed. And if people disappoint you, it's overwhelmingly because you did not have them in the correct genre. So that's on you.
Chris Alton says, good day, mates. Good day, Chris. Thanks for being here. 2 Cents says, R. Spencer is claiming the conservatives are about to have a mass meltdown. This sums up R. Spencer's contemptuous view of the weak, sheep-like, mediocre herd. He sees American conservatives as, I presume the last word would be as being. Yeah, Richard Spencer does have a sort of master-slave view of the world. He views himself as the master and everyone else is sort of like a slave, insofar as I can tell. And I think this is a profound delusion of grandeur, in my opinion, because if you look at what he's actually accomplished and the role he currently fulfills within American politics, he certainly is not the master of much insofar as I can see. So that is my take on the Spencer situation. Luke?
Yeah, he's not someone you want checking the engines before the plane takes off. He's not someone you want leading any movement. He's not someone that you want to give money to. It's not someone you want to publicly throw your lot in with. That would be absolutely reckless. But I mean, you wouldn't want Sam Kinison to check the engines before the plane takes off. You wouldn't want Sam Kinison to lead a political or social movement. You wouldn't want to entrust your well-being to Sam Kinison. But if you simply appreciate Sam Kinison as a shockingly funny comic who says outrageous things, then you have appropriately situated Sam Kinison in his correct genre. And if you put Richard Spencer in the same sort of genre as you'd put a Sam Kinison, that this is someone who's going to say shocking things that will continually surprise you, but you don't look to him for anything else, then he's not going to disappoint you. For example, Ben Shapiro will never disappoint me. Because I understand that Ben Shapiro is going to simply take the most conservative position possible on every issue, even if he knows absolutely nothing about what he's talking about, that he's going to speak very rapidly and he's going to use a lot of easy put downs on people. That's Ben Shapiro's genre. He's just someone who wants to occupy the most right-wing position possible within establishment conservatism, and that he will talk constantly about all sorts of things that he knows nothing about. Once you know and accept that about Ben Shapiro, he can never disappoint you. If you know and accept that Richard Spencer is not someone that you want to lead a movement or to represent you, then if you put him in the same genre as you would put Sam Kinison, then Richard's never going to disappoint you.
So true. Jay Barr says, I have always had a Lovecraftian view of the world. LL joke. Lovecraft was an excellent writer. Also, he wrote very well about immigration and some other things, but can't really get into that now. Mike says, this didn't show up on my subscriptions. I apologize, Mike. I had no control over that. Chris Alton says the same. I saw Luke mirror it. Well, I'm glad Luke is mirroring this. 2 Cents says, whoa, Cotto begins speaking apparently telepathically before his mouth moves. I have no such power. It's the nature of the stream. This is the first time I've used StreamYard. Luke introduced me to it before the episode began. It's very cool. I do enjoy it. In many respects, it's even better than Jitsi, which we usually use. 2 Cents says, this virus is a test of ideology and of personality and society. I don't think there would be any disagreement here. Chris Alton says, great points by Luke and Cotto. Thank you, Chris. 2 Cents says, the virus has been excellent for internet content. Thanks, coronavirus. Glib Medley asks, is JC okay with Spring Breaker cavorting in his state? I really don't care. I'm actually glad the ones who are here are spending money here and propping up what's left of the economy. But the beaches were closed in Ellis County earlier this morning, and that is Tampa. Excuse me, that's not Tampa. That's St. Petersburg and Clearwater. Tampa is in the adjoining county, which is Hillsborough. But and it's unfortunate, really, for the economy. But also at the beach, I don't necessarily know the virus was spreading in legions there, but the county commission, which is called the county council elsewhere, it did what it chose to do, and that is that. 2 Cents says, neat. I haven't left the house for 5 weeks. Normie, wow, way to do your part stopping the spread of the coronavirus. Neat. Coronavirus? That is very good. 2 Cents says, some are adapted to this new world order. Yes, they are. 2 Cents also says, time to drink, unlike Luke, who doesn't ever drink a drop, which frankly I do not understand. Wine for some, 12 therapy groups for others. Oswald Spangler says, can't believe Gottfried isn't here. 2 Cents says, Luke is talking entering the zone. Glenn Medley says, no mention of tefillin. No, that wasn't brought up. 2 Cents says, be your best self 2020. 2 Cents says, I remember hearing a historian describe and contrast the two work styles of Adolf and Uncle Joe, and I thought it would make a great popular book on work and self-improvement. I don't know which publishing house would touch the book. 2 Cents asks, what style of worker are you? I don't know the names of the work styles, but I would never compare myself to either one of those two. So I shall have to digress. Jay Barr says 50% of my income is in danger, but overall, I'm grateful for my circumstance. Well, that's a very good perspective to have, Jay Barr. Very sorry to hear about what the coronavirus has done to your wallet, but I don't think this is a real long-term economic problem. It's just something everyone has to get through time being. But best of luck in handling. No question about that. Take it easy as much as you can. Simon LaCour asks, does Luke drink more wine these days? The Talmud teaches us that alcohol has healing effects.
I don't drink, so at most, I've never been a drinker, and I also have an addictive personality, so I've never wanted to develop a taste for alcohol. But during Kiddush, during various ritual occasions, I'll be willing to swallow a mouthful of some wine. But that's it. I never drink for pleasure.
Jay Barr says, Luke has a unique perspective. Ultimately, I gravitate toward originality. Kato and Luke have that in spades. Well, thank you very much, Jay Barr. Very cool. Okay, Simon LaCour said, the versions of Mein Kampf available in Germany include special annotations by experts who admonish you not to be a Nazi. Well, I'm glad that there are people telling you not to be a Nazi, but I don't really think that these German experts are going to stop people from becoming Nazis at all. Germany, the level of cultural oppression there from the left is sort of like a radicalism factory, I'm sad to say. Jay Barr says, I read 1/3 of a certain book about culture that was written by a fellow who I don't think we could say here because YouTube would probably get us into trouble. But Jay Barr then says, I quit my job and dedicated my life to naming them. I currently spend my time red pilling people in a local Walmart parking lot. Of course, Jay Barr is being facetious. It's not really him. That's good. That is good. Oh, God. James Fountain says, 3 separate times in my life I tried to read MK. I found it impenetrable. I tried reading part of it myself, never got into it. Okay, 2 Cents says, yeah, that's a shame. This is directed at Luke. Actually, the chat just moved, so I need to get back up to where I was so I can finish this remark. Where is it? Okay, from 2 Cents. Yeah, that's a shame. Never drinking IMO. It's offensive to my belief system, but this is America, so to each their own. I'm not into 12-step stuff or ancient Orthodox ethno-religious traditions from the Middle East. Okay, this question is for Luke Ford from Simon LaCour. Would you say that the Orthodox Jewish matchmaking shidduchim system is superior to secular dating, purely in terms of how conducive each is to the well-being of those involved?
Probably.
James Butler asks, "Where's your kippa, Joseph?" And for those who don't know, that's also called a yarmulke. No, I'm not. I'm not. I'm a humanist, not an Orthodox, so I don't wear it. But I do have one. It's just not here with me now. Let's see here. Oswald Spangler asks, to Cato Gottfried, would CD19 have happened if the Frankfurt School never happened? I would say for certain on that one way or the other. This is like asking if postmodernism had never happened with the coronavirus have never happened. Just can't say. I'm afraid I can't say. There's no real way of figuring that out, at least on my end. Well, that was directed to me, but Luke, do you have any take on that?
No.
I think so. Jay Var asks, "What is an efficient strategy for warning dissemination in crowds during emergencies?" I don't know that there is one. I really don't know that there is one. I think if you have a crowd of people, they're susceptible to crowd mentality or herd mentality, and it will be a problem, and that will hinder efficiency of your warning. Luke, do you have any perspective on that?
I would just go adjacent to that and say that it seems to me that the most moral and socially responsible thing to do right now is to comport yourself as though you have the virus on the off chance that you do. So act as though you have the virus. Be careful with your social distancing and take all precautions that are reasonable.
Duvid asks Cato Gottfried, "Want to do a virtual Sabbath and sing some Hebrew classics?" Not right now. I don't really think this is the appropriate time, but interesting question all the same, Duvid. Simon LaCour says, "Now you'd be singing Lecha Dodi Ilkrat Kala myself." Well, very interesting. At least this show has had an unintentional sing-along, which I find to be cool. There are definitely worse things to be singing. Luke Aveden says, "Hello, how goes it, Luke? Hope all is well." Oh, but Luke's wife does have actual medical training, interesting in dealing with pathogens. So I'm sure that she has given him some interesting advice about how to deal with the coronavirus. So if Luke has anything to chime in about, please feel free to do so. That goes without saying. David said, "Everyone else is now on YouTube doing it. Sign from Hashem to sing Hebrew classics online." That would really have to change the subject of the stream, but I'll put it this way: there are other things to be singing that are far worse. So if people are doing that, I find it to be very cool indeed. Luke says, "Glad Joseph Cato has survived the coronavirus." Yes, I am not corona positive. I don't even have any reason to get tested. So let's hope it stays there. Luke says, "I keep breaking quarantine to buy energy drinks." Well, if you got to do it, I guess that's your
that's not
point
me.
of view.
That's
Hopefully
another Luke. That's another Luke. That's Luke Avedon. So guys, don't think that Luke Ford.
Oh, that's why I said Luke Avedon. Yeah.
I'm not out
My
there
apologies if I
drinks,
confused them.
guys.
Yeah, definitely. No, not the Luke I'm speaking with now. But as long as it's legal in your neck of the woods to go buy the energy drinks, maybe that's considered to be an essential good or service or whatever. Power to you. J Bar says, "Do you agree or disagree that there is a separate morality appropriate to politics, but one which conflicts with conventional or private morality?" Ideally, I'd like everyone to have an integrated framework as to how they act in life, double standards. But I think it is inevitable that in most societies there will be a political morality and a conventional or private morality, as Jay Barr said. That's not me advocating. That's just my understanding of the human condition. Luke Ford, what do you have to say about that?
I think it's sometimes useful to look at politics through the lens of morality, and it's often even more useful to look at it removing the lens of morality. So, so both perspectives will have their benefits, but my overall understanding of human relations, particularly relations between states, is that we're all trapped in an iron cage together, that we are akin to drug gangs. And so just when drug gangs have conflicts, they can't turn to the police or to the courts, but they have to sort things out themselves. Essentially, that is the state of nature between states, because there is essentially no higher authority when states have different interests. So I find it most useful on my streams, generally speaking, to discuss politics and international relations without any reference to morality, because everyone's going to have a different morality. I come from Orthodox Judaism, but 95% of my viewership are not Orthodox Jews. We don't have a common morality. So I prefer to discuss politics most of the time simply through the prism of power. What leads to power, what consolidates power, what threatens power, and who has the power. Those are the questions I mainly ask about politics.
If I might ask before the next question, I presume you're modern Orthodox, right? I never asked that before. That's my impression.
No, I just say I'm right in the middle. So I spend much of my time in traditional Orthodox synagogues, and some of my time among the modern Orthodox. I don't have a preference for either modern Orthodoxy or traditional Orthodoxy. I see each side has its own strengths.
Well, I think both will wind up having more of a historical impact than the non-Orthodox strains of Judaism. So when it comes to investing in the future, you definitely are in the right place. And I say that as a humanist. Okay, let's see here. Oswald Spangler asks if Luke is doing online 12-step meetings during the quarantine.
Yeah, well, I mainly do 12-step phone meetings rather than in-person meetings, because they're simply more convenient for my schedule, and I can also take care of my morning workout while attending the online meetings, and then I also talk to my sponsees while I'm doing my morning workout as well. So it's simply more convenient, and I'm a very oral, AURAL person, so I like listening to things. So I've always enjoyed 12-step phone meetings. I have cut off my in-person meetings the last month. I haven't gone to synagogue, haven't gone to any optional social engagements, haven't gone to any in-person 12-step meetings.
Let's see. I guess you're able to keep the synagogue commitment virtually online, right? There must be something set up for that.
In part, I mean, as an Orthodox Jew, you can't use the phone, you can't Skype in on the Sabbath, but we're certainly very connected, and we're certainly there for each other in times of crises. So it's really helpful to belong to a close-knit, high-intensity community during difficult times, because we're all, trying to help each other out. If someone's business is in trouble, we will patronize the business. If someone needs help, we will fundraise or we will get them help. And pretty much someone knows someone who can help out anyone in our community. So one person may have a prime minister on his cell phone, another person does business with someone who's close to Trump, et cetera, et cetera. So tight-knit communities, I think, are vital for leading a fulfilling life, and they also give you abundant opportunities to pitch in and help other people, to volunteer, and which makes you feel good about yourself. And then once you pitch in, you volunteer, you make yourself useful to a community. It also makes people much more likely to help you out when you have trouble.
Cannot disagree with any of that. And let's see here. Oswald Spangler asks, how fulfilling are the online 12-step meetings compared to in-person ones?
Very much. Very, very fulfilling. Very good. About the same.
And Oswald then asks, thoughts on pietism? I'm not a pious person, so I think my perspective is not hard to figure out. But Luke, what are your thoughts on pietism?
I'm sure it works for some people. I mean, just as I'm sure Scientology works for some people. And what was that EST, EST or Landmark Forum? I'm sure that works for some people. So I'm sure a lot of different approaches work for people. I believe with William James in the varieties of the religious experience.
Simon LaCour asks, if white men weren't groping black women, the coronavirus wouldn't be such a major problem. Should we be paying more attention to intersectionalist feminism, both theory and practice? Absolutely. Yes, this is the most pressing issue facing America today. It's just awful. Luke, anything to say about it?
Nothing.
Jay Barr says or asks, a bit off topic, but I would like to hear your perspectives. Can neuroscience predict political affiliation? I'll share my view in 1 second. I'll just say that if anybody else has any questions or comments, please add them to the chat now, because this will be the last call for them. So please do throw them on in there. And now, as for neuroscience, getting back to what Jay Barr asked, yeah, I do think it does predict political affiliation quite well. I don't think the correlation is 100%. There are certain times when environmental factors can be uncannily strong, but I do think that neuroscience does predict political affiliation quite well, generally speaking. And I'm immensely impressed with all of the advances which have been made in it.
I agree. I have nothing to add further.
All right, and let me see. Oh, there's something from Oswald Spangler. Why wasn't Luke at the recent Based Deleuze release event in LA hosted by Justin Murphy and Moldbug?
And I was social distancing.
Got it. Okay, and if there's last questions or comments, guys, like I said before, this is the last call, so throw them in and we will get to them. I guess this is, we'll wait to see if anybody else has anything to say. An interesting question to me is what will become of the presidential election? Will this whole coronavirus thing really impact in any big way? Some people say it'll throw it to Biden, which would be obviously against Trump's favor. I don't think so. I think Trump was always favored to win this thing, and I think he still will. But I think that what's happening is that Biden is being frozen out of the national discussion. He relied a lot on free advertising, as he told Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. But now is their time, along with Mike Pence, and they both are getting pretty good marks from people in terms of how they're handling this. So I think that this will actually benefit both parties quite a bit going forward. And I would be flabbergasted if Trump lost the election at this point. But Luke, what's your opinion on coronavirus and the Donald?
Well, I would expect it would break in favor of the Donald once he's shown that he's on top of the situation by doing. It seems that Tucker Carlson red-pilled him on the coronavirus March 7. Ever since then, Trump has been taking it very seriously. I think it's excellent that he's out front every day doing news conferences. He's showing to be very active in responding to the virus. He understands his presidency is at stake. So I'd say since about March 7, he's been on top of his game. And I would think that all the issues that the coronavirus raises, that they would predominantly break in favor of Trumpian politics.
Cognitive Dissonant asks, says, neuroscience is only predictive in wider context of environmental exigencies. Interesting. Any perspective on that, Luke?
Yeah, I mean, neuroscience and its basis in politics, of course, it comes in context that different things are regarded as right-wing or left-wing in different contexts, but there are useful metrics for understanding political inclinations that you can use going back millennia, and that is your focus on order or is your focus on change? So those who focus on order, generally speaking, you can regard them as right-wing. So these people tend to have very strong disgust reactions very much interested in maintaining order in their own rooms, in their own houses, in their own lives. They prefer the tried and familiar. They prefer poetry that rhymes. They prefer novels, films, and TV shows that have a definitive ending. And people on the left, they prefer new experiences. They prefer trying new foods. They're more interested in change than in the maintenance of traditional forms of order.
And let's see here from Oswald Spangler. Social distancing is impossible in the internet age. Should be called physical distancing. Very true. I had not thought of that, but I think that is very true. Any comments, Luke?
Sure. I mean, I think social distancing, people understand words in a context. So it's not just their denotative meaning, it's also their connotative meaning, meaning what do the words connote. So we understand social distancing as staying physically apart. So that's the meaning that it's used. Just like conspiracy theory, its primary meaning is not about conspiracies that are hatched in private. Its primary meaning when people talk about conspiracy theories are conspiracies that are hatched in private that most people deny happened. So 9/11 was undoubtedly the result of a conspiracy theory by Al-Qaeda. But when people talk about 9/11 conspiracy theories, they never mean that Al-Qaeda conspired to carry out 9/11. They mean crazy stuff like the government rigged these buildings to deconstruct. So words don't just have their exact denotative meaning. They primarily serve as metaphors for reality, and the metaphor for reality that social distancing means in this day and age is that you maintain at least 6 feet between you and other people in real life.
Jay Barr says, based in reference to something that Luke said before, no doubt. Simon LaCour says, it seems to me that many people want to be stronger on China because of the virus's origin. Stronger on China is more Trump's thing than any Democrat's thing. Very true. Yeah, China, I believe, has found new and innovative ways to fund various Democratic Party operations and politicians. So Simon LaCour brings up a great point. Luke, anything to say about it?
No, nothing.
Half Galatian says Trump will talk tough, but big tech rules the roost because they comprise Trump's only governing metric, the stock market. This is interesting. Big tech does rule the roost. They don't have obviously controlling interest in the stock market, but they do have a lot to say about it. But big tech does indeed have it cracks the whip nowadays to no small degree, no question about it, and that does influence the stock market, which Trump about. So interesting point, Half Galician. Anything to share about it, Luke?
Yeah, so once Trump was elected, or even when he was running for office, I never expected him to fulfill all his campaign promises. I also never expected him to fulfill zero of his campaign promises. So I expected him to fulfill some, or to make some progress towards some of his promises. So just as I almost never get disappointed in people once I situate them in their correct genre. Trump is a politician who's working within a particular political context, and so I've never been either white-pilled or black-pilled on Trump. I've never been like angry and disgusted with Trump, to the best of my knowledge, and I've never been elated and over the moon with what he's doing. I think I've always kind of steered a steady course, thinking that he's going to make some progress towards his goals, which is what I've seen he's happened. So I'm comfortable. You could give Trump a C or a B or a C minus. Anything in that realm makes sense to me. I don't expect Trump to be a Superman, and I've never been black-pilled on Trump either. So I think he's made some progress towards his goals, and when people say he's made significant progress, I can understand that point of view. When other people argue he's made minimal progress, I kind of understand that point of view, but I'm kind of right in the middle. I would prefer Trump to the alternatives, but I don't think that he's come close to fulfilling the majority of his platform.
It's very hard to do given the system. I always had tempered my expectations of Trump, and like you, I'm not disappointed as a result of that. Some people really did get, as it's called, black pill. They really lost it because Trump did not essentially come down from the clouds and start making everybody shiver where they stood and making the ground shake at his footprint, as some, I guess, Greek god would have done back in the day. And a lot of people really had these absurd expectations of Trump, but I was not one of them. And I would encourage people not to become folks like that. Doesn't end well. It's not a good place to be in, to say the absolute least. And let's see here. Oswald Spangler says, fair enough, Luke, in reference to, I think, the last question of his, which Luke answered. Half Galician says, Apple will never repatriate production. Chips co's will sell sensitive IP. Nothing will change in long run from this. That's my counter sentiment take. Very interesting, Half Galician. Luke, anything to say about it?
I think that's a useful perspective to take, but there have been fundamental and I believe permanent shifts to the supply chain even before the coronavirus. Companies saw that they needed to start to shift production out of China, and they have been doing so before the coronavirus. This will exacerbate that. So I don't fully agree with Half Galician there. I do think we will have an acceleration of the trend of companies shifting their supply chains out of China. Now, there's a long way between that and saying that Apple will now make all their products in the United States. So again, I'm in the middle ground. I don't fully side with Half Galician if he's saying that nothing will change in the long run for this. Yeah, I think there will be significant changes in the long run from this. On the other hand, I don't go all the way to say that this will, completely end globalism.
And cognitive dissonance says there's a tension between the dopamine and serotonin systems in our brains. Hedonistic novelty seeking versus hierarchy achievement seeking. Very true, cognitive dissonance. I really think there's anything for me to add there, but Luke, is there anything you would like to say about
it? Just that we should recognize that the good life requires tension, that there's considerable tension between belonging to a close-knit, high-intensity, organized community like I belong to in Orthodox Judaism, and also having the personal freedom to speak your mind on YouTube live streams. These are opposites which are pointing in in different directions, and so reconciling those two opposite tendencies requires one to live in some tension. And so there are many different values which I hold in tension. I mean, love is a wonderful thing. Justice is a wonderful thing. Vengeance is frequently appropriate. Forgiveness is frequently appropriate. So I see all values and all good things being in constant tension with each other.
And Oswald Spangler asks, does Luke think there are more gays or lesbians in the Jewish diaspora?
Yeah, I just anecdotally, it just seems that there's a higher percentage of homosexuality in the Jewish diaspora than among the non-Jews. And I think you would attribute that perhaps to more sexual experimentation, which takes place among, say, people who go to university, people who have a lot of secular education, perhaps higher IQ people, maybe more. No, I'm going to take that back. But just as there are a lot of Jews on the left, but when you account for IQ and levels of secular education, the difference between Jews and non-Jews considerably diminishes as far as being leftist. Perhaps there's a difference because Jews are so urban, and because Jews are such a secular people and have had a lot of, on average, secular education, they therefore may be much more willing to experiment with homosexuality or to dally in it than the average person, but that perhaps non-Jews with equal urban living experiences and equal amounts of secular education and equal positions in society perhaps are approximately equal in their sexual experimentation as well.
Cognitive dissonance says left and right are coalitions of convenience. Both are riddled with contradictions. Ergo, the coalition between feminists, LGBTQ, and CAIR, the Center for American Islamic Relations, and La Raza. Very true, cognitive dissonance. I have nothing to add to that. Luke, do you have anything to say?
Nope.
And the last man asks, Luke, who is your favorite thinker that is non orthodox?
Oh, maybe Dennis Prager.
And let's see, Simon LaCour says, Luke, doesn't the Talmud teach that Am Yisrael doesn't engage in homosexuality and bestiality? What do you make of that?
Well, the Talmud says a lot of things, and so the Talmud is a collection of oral discussions among rabbis who had no idea that one day their discussions would be read by non-Jews. So people say a lot of things when they're in their in-group and they're having private, intense discussions that they don't think anyone's ever going to hear. So it's very easy to pop off with statements like that may bear no relationship to reality.
And Oswald Spangler asks, I believe this is the last question, remote viewing, based or cringe?
No opinion.
I don't have a real opinion on that, but Luke, do you?
No opinion.
I don't think it makes much of a difference either way. That's just my point of view here. And yeah, I think that is the last question. Yeah, the live chat today was very good as usual. I think we get a very reasonable and responsible group here with questions that are definitely worth addressing. I will say, if anybody has not already done so, please do consider subscribing to the Cato Godfrey channel. Paul and I would appreciate it mightily. If you already subscribed, thank you for doing so. And this is also being mirrored Luke's channel, so people are probably viewing it there. And it will be up. Don't worry, it will be up again at the Cato Godfrey channel. Later tonight, early tomorrow, is our bonus episode. I think I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, this is a new thing we're starting, a bonus episode. We'll try to do it each week, but no promises there. But I think it's a very cool new feature of the show, and I hope that it gives people something else to watch, something worthwhile to watch. Of course, wouldn't want to waste anyone's time. Luke, do you have anything you'd like to say about anything we've discussed before we go?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you very much, Joseph.
You're very welcome. Luke, thank you for joining in today. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in, for watching. Very cool of you. I will be, and Paul and I and Luke will all be seeing you soon, as long as you care to tune into our stuff. We're not going anywhere, at least that we know of. So, yep, that is pretty much it. Have a good one, everybody.